all of a sudden, we see that actually Ma, who seemed to be talking before about unchanging eternal, is actually beginning to talk about the evolution of Qi. So he's beginning to move towards this notion that we wrote in the First Principles and First Values book, that the eternal Tao is the evolving Tao. But he would say the eternal Qi is the evolving Qi. The eternal Eros is the evolving Eros. Huh. Ma's 5 ontogenerative beings become different forms within the evolution of Qi, or Eros, which is alive with cosmological consciousness, within which human beings participate. Oh my fucking God. You know, we said last week that in some sense, we're claiming importance, right? Something that you're not allowed to do in the postmodern world. We're saying this matters, right? That this coming together every week in one mountain, many paths, to actually recognize where we are in reality in this moment, to be real, to get real about reality. And that means for us 3 things. It means we address the question of where are we? What's the nature of the world we live in? And where are we once we understand the universe story, right? Where are we? Universe story. Where do we live? What kind of world do we live in? What are the ground rules of the world, or does the world have ground rules? And we, based on a very deep reading, a next stage reading of science, we actually affirm that the world has a set of first principles and first values, and that those first principles and first values are structural to reality, that they are what we call plot lines of cosmos. That's a very big deal. And then, kind of as a subset of this question of where, we say, okay, where are we along the way, right? Where are we in the story? Now, paradoxically, what Yuval and I agree on deeply is that we're facing existential risk, that we're facing a metacrisis. And paradoxically, we actually, at least in terms of major issues like artificial intelligence, we're reading some of the same sources, we're talking to some of the same people, and we agree that there is a metacrisis which emerges from the exponentialized nature and widely distributed nature of technologies. From my perspective, that's one major vector, perhaps the primary one. Yuval and I probably agree that that's the primary one, which actually challenges reality with collapse. It's a big deal, right? It's a big deal. That's a big agreement, right? In other words, we agree on the subset question of where. Does everyone get what I mean by that? In other words, where are we in this story? But we differ on something unimaginably profound, and the difference between us is actually that I'm right and he's wrong, right? In other words, this is not, a place of, okay, multiple perspectives, they're all equal. They're not. Yuval's wrong. Now, along the way to being wrong, he says lots of right things. Does everyone get that? He says lots of right things, which I'll talk about in a second. But ultimately, his ultimate position is wrong, because his ultimate position is is a dogmatic religious fundamentalist position. Yuval adopts a dogmatic religious fundamentalist position, which is that there is no value in the world. So where we live, and his answer to the primary question of where is, we live in a world which is, and we saw it last week, we actually listened to a quote from Homo sapiens, from one of Yuval's early books, in which he said it quite clearly: as far as we can tell, human life has absolutely no meaning. Humans are the outcome of blind evolutionary processes that operate without goal or purpose. Our actions are not part of some divine cosmic plan. And if planet Earth were to blow up tomorrow, the universe would probably keep going about its business as usual. As far as we can tell, human subjectivity, meaning love, loyalty, value, all of it, human subjectivity wouldn't be missed. I mean, it doesn't matter. Hence, any meaning that people ascribe to their lives is an illusion. That's his answer to the question of where. That's a dogma. That's a dogma. That is a religious fundamentalist dogma. That is, and he uses in here the word scientific. Right? There is no scientific evidence which points in that direction. Right? Science doesn't actually address this question of interior meaning, which Yuval knows very well. So he's making what Walter Kaufmann calls a gerrymandering move. Gerrymandering is in politics when you redraw the lines of a political district in order to assure a particular outcome in elections. So Walter Kaufmann, the great scholar at Columbia of existential thought, talks about religious gerrymandering or philosophical gerrymandering, where you inappropriately borrow or redraw lines of conversation to come to a particular conclusion, or you draw authority illegitimately in a deceptive way. So the paragraph I just read you, Yuval slips in the words surreptitiously. He slips in the words, as far as we can tell, from a purely scientific viewpoint. But of course, it's the most deceptive thing you could possibly write. From a purely scientific viewpoint, reality has no meaning. But science is not addressing meaning. Science is not addressing the immeasurable, the priceless, and the inherent meaning structures, right, of reality. The science is addressing the measurable. Right? Science is addressing first the it world, the world of physics, and then the life world, the biosphere. Right? But even in the biosphere, science is not addressing meaning. And in the world of physics, science is not addressing interiors. Science will just talk about interiors as attraction. But science doesn't address that issue, which is why, for example, Yuval's book *Sapiens* has 2 paragraphs on the world of matter and life. And of course, science has no way to address the world of interior human mind. Science is quantifying, right? Science actually moves from the time of Aristotle, where science classified, right, to the monoworld of Kepler and Galileo, around the time of the Renaissance, where science moved from classification to measurement. But value is about the immeasurable. So to say at the beginning of this paragraph, from a purely scientific viewpoint, is disingenuous at best, deceptive at worst. And Yuval, my brother, you know that. So we completely agree with our brother Yuval that yes, we are facing existential risks. So in terms of the where question, right, in terms of where we are in the story, the subset of the great where question, right, we're at a moment where we're facing genuine existential risk, threat to our species. This realization that for the first time we have a global civilization when all local civilizations have fallen. We haven't solved any of their challenges. 1, 2, we have exponential technologies. 2, 3, which are being weaponized. 3, 4, but we have no coherent way to address those challenges because we have no global coordination, because we have no global coherence. Right? 5, those exponential technologies are available to widely distributed sets of actors, which was never true before. And I'll stop at 5. I could go, and I have before, we've talked about this before, I could go to 20. But you get the idea, right? We completely agree on that. We agree on the where, right, in the subset question, but not the where in the primary question, where are we? Now, again, I want to make very clear, or a book here, I want to make very clear that Yuval's position is dogmatic. It's a dogmatic fundamentalist position. And let's call out dogmatic fundamentalism for what it is. It needs to be done. And before I do that, I want to just say one sentence, which I'm repeating from last week. But let me just kind of, before I kind of, well, you know what? Let me finish this point, then make a kind of broad point, then do the second 2 questions, and then dive in today. And today's going to be all about pleasure. Our topic today is pleasure, but it's pleasure in the context of this conversation that we're having. So let me just finish this last point, bracket it, make a couple of broader comments to kind of contextualize what we're doing and where we're going today and the next, I hope, with the grace of meaning and goodness, hope for the next 10 weeks or so. And like we have a kind of wild journey that we're going to take here, which I'm crazy excited to take and which needs to be taken. But before we do that, let me just talk for a moment about why this is I'm calling this a religious fundamentalist position, right? It's a dogmatic claim. It's dogmatic claim. And then maybe we'll do some broad remarks just for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, just to frame where we are. 2 quick minutes. We'll read the code, and then we'll kind of take the next steps. So to make the claim that the world is essentially valueless, okay, that meaning doesn't matter, right? That human subjectivity, aka love, is utterly contrived, would not be missed in the universe, right? Has no meaning, has no value, right? Is not a claim you could look at a child in the eye and make seriously. And you never would. You actually would know in your interior that you're doing something fundamentally destructive. You would feel the cruelty of making that claim to a child. And you would feel that cruelty because you would understand, you would know, you with me? You would know that this is going to violate something in the child. Does that make sense? So that's number 1. Number 2, precisely what attachment theory tells us in modern thought is that the experience of a world in which I am loved, and it's my early caretakers who kind of hold that experience for me. And if I don't get that experience from early caretakers, then I actually can get it later in life. I actually have to recover that experience or discover it. If I can't recover it, right, by going back and revisiting my relationship with my parents and finding the love that was hidden, if I can't recover it because maybe the love wasn't there, then I can discover it later in life and in other forms of relationship. And that's true in terms of in other forms of relationship and in other qualities of being in reality. I can actually feel loved by reality through beauty. And I can feel loved by reality through goodness. And I can feel loved by reality through truth. And I can feel loved by reality in the dance of sexing at its best when I'm licked and sucked and held and caressed in a way in which I actually experience that my need is my beloved's allurement. Just like a baby experiences him and herself with the sentence in relationship to the mother in the best possible circumstance, my need is your allurement. When the mother looks at the child and says, your need is my allurement, or the father in a different way, or the caretaker, your need is my allurement, and I hold the child and I bring the child to my breast, or a father holds the child kind of close and deep and looks in the child's eyes. I remember when my son Zion was born. Zion is my son. and Mariana Kaplan's son, a beautiful boy. And as Zion was born, right, he went, almost immediately to me, a few seconds later. And I spent the first hour chanting to him, right, singing to him, chanting to him. And then I recorded all of the chants a little later and send them the chants so he could remember those moments in which he was welcomed in reality, right? So attachment theory is essentially a scientific documenting of the fact that if a child doesn't experience that love, what Yuval dismisses as meaningless human subjectivity, if a child doesn't experience that love, the longitudinal studies of science of the last 50 years, which began with Bowlby's epic, monumental Separation and Loss that he wrote after World War II and continued into Mary Ainsworth's work and then others, Kohut, Fairburn, Winnicott, Harry Stack Sullivan, etc. Right? We actually realize the child's life falls apart when the child is not held, right, in the arms of welcoming love. Even if the child has all of their survival needs met, and all my survival needs are met, right? I have food and clothing, and I'm in a warm place, and I'm getting, right linguistic training. I'm getting all the kind of quote unquote survival needs, quote unquote, met, but I'm not actually experiencing the fragrance of love. My life actually collapses psychologically, physically. Rates of suicide go way up. Rates of addiction go way up. Rates of abuse go way up. Right? Rates of loneliness go way up. Rates of mental collapse go way up. In a plethora of studies. Now, why would that be true? Right? If the world is merely a survival world, and survival is understood to be, parentheses, wrongly, end parentheses, but survival is understood to be this kind of mechanics of cosmos, which it's not. I'm going to say that again. Survival is actually a value itself. It's the value of life. But if we kind of accept the kind of dogmatic position that Harari expresses, right? Life is the result of blind evolutionary process, right? Which then drive us to survive. That's an utter lie. There are blind evolutionary processes. Evolution moves towards ever more life, and life is a value of cosmos. And evolution moves towards ever more depth and ever more embrace and ever more mutuality and ever more union and ever more embrace. But just bracket that for a second. Let's just understand that if the universe wasn't a love story, there'd be no need for that, would there? Right? If the universe wasn't a love story, there'd be no need, right, to be embraced by my caretaker in mad love, and there'd be no empirical evidence, right, which said that my life breaks down if that doesn't happen. And it's the only reason that I need that so desperately is because I need to feel at home in the world. And because the world is a cosmoerotic universe, because the universe is a love story, and because reality is Eros, and my early caretaker represents the universe to me. So if my early caretaker is not attuned to me, if I can use the classical word, and doesn't know how to soothe me, meaning to me, that's again a classical therapeutic or analytic word, right? Doesn't know how to hold me in a place where I feel welcome in the universe, right? Then my entire interior collapses. Right? So Yuval's assertion, right, that human subjectivity, aka love, is blind, and that the universe is blind and empty, right, actually is such an empirical violation, right, of our actual scientific knowledge of the universe. And attachment theory is one of the most important advances in science, number one. And number two, right, it of course violates the entire inherent sense of evolutionary forces, right, which have a dimension of freedom in them and have a dimension of randomness in them, but they're randomness in the context of a larger movement. And that movement goes from quarks to culture. And it goes, say it with me, we've said it before, it goes from mud to Mozart. It goes from bacteria to Bach. It goes from dirt to Dostoevsky. It goes from slime to Shakespeare. And it's a very, very coherent, profoundly coherent, intimate movement. It's the progressive deepening of intimacies within this dimension of reality. And of course, there's also an enormous amount of information that points that this dimension of reality is not the entire dimension, that this is one dimension in a multidimensional reality. Let's put that aside. So I just want to understand with you that this claim that Yuval is making and falsely hijacking science, the scientific viewpoint as evidence, and is demagoguery. It's pure demagoguery. It's pure religious fundamentalism. And, you know, in our first week, last week, I said, and I affirm it, right? I look forward to having dinner with Yuval. I'm not demonizing Yuval, right? People ask, is Yuval operating in bad faith? I have no idea what faith Yuval's operating in, but I assume it's good faith. I assume he's a good man, right? And I'm not interested in Yuval Harari as a philosopher because he's not a philosopher. Yuval's a historian, right? He's actually in his early work, which I happen to have here on my desk, I've been reading through. So Yuval, I'm probably just me and your mother and a few other people have bought this. This is your doctorate, Renaissance Military Memoirs. Oh my God, beautiful. And then this is another kind of probably a subset of your doctorate, Special Operations, the Age of Chivalry, 1100 to 1550, right? So these are kind of, two related works of kind of very, very, narrow but fascinating history, which I think he did a fantastic job in. But when Yuval, you go from being a particular historian to a generalist historian, that's also okay. But then when you go from there to actually making philosophical claims, right, which are actually incredibly shoddy, and yes, I understand they represent kind of the consensus of the legacy academic institutions, and you're actually parroting or voicing that consensus, but that consensus is actually fundamentally incorrect. It's a dogmatic, fundamentalist, reductive materialism, which was in vogue for a period of time, but shouldn't be anymore. It was in vogue because it was in rebellion against the overreaches of the broken stories of some of the classical religious fundamentalisms. We both understand that together, Yuval. But actually, that story is ultimately inaccurate, right? You can't look at a child and say, love's not real, right? Because it violates the child's essence. And you know that, you can feel that in your body. You don't look at your beloved and say, I'm loving you, but love's not real. Now, you might be able to get away with it with your beloved when you're 50 or 40 or 30, because there's some kind of existential kind of, play in it. I get that. But you can't say it to a child. That's what attachment theory is saying, right? And it flies in the face of everything we know about the universe. Now, that last sentence flies in the face of, let me add, almost everything we know about the universe. I'm not going to validate now, meaning I'm not going to now go into a kind of deep story of the universal love story, right? And what all the evidence is for reality as, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to get to some of that a little later today. Okay, we're going to get to the code in a second, but I want to just go one more step. I want to really understand that this notion, I'm talking about everything now is in the answer to the question, where? Does everyone get that? We're talking about where are we? Where are we? Right. So Yuval says we're in an empty, reductive, materialist, meaningless world in which human subjectivity, love matters not one iota. It's all made up. There is no meaning. No. That's actually a claim. That's a dogmatic, fundamentalist religious claim, right? Which virtually every system, right, of interior science that's ever been developed disagrees with and counters based on an enormous amount of empirical information. Now, Yuval would say that some of those or many of those systems in their exterior expressions violated what we would think is good today. Well, that's true, but that means that you're affirming there's something that's good, right? So yes, the religions overreached, and yes, the religions, right, told stories that overreached and that were often fictitious stories right, in their exteriors, right? Their surface structures of the religion were often fictitious stories, which at particular moments in time wrought enormous destruction. Just like the scientific stories of the 20th century created the technologies, right, and the philosophies, right, that led to more people killed in the 20th century than any other human century and higher levels of abject human brutality. So both science and religion have enormous shadows, and clearly reality is trying to get someplace. Clearly, there's an evolution, right, of love. Clearly, love is not static. But I want to bracket all of that for a second. I want to make just a kind of smaller point now. Okay, you ready, everybody? That this notion that reality is value, that reality is that the answer to the question of where, is we actually live in a universe which is overflowing with meaning. We live in a world which is overflowing with beauty, right? We live in a world that's overflowing with goodness. We live in a world that's overflowing with truth. There's a plentitude of Eros, that actually reality is Eros all the way up and all the way down. And that's going to be a critically important conversation. And about 6-7 weeks, we're going to spend a couple of weeks talking about suffering and pain. So why is there suffering and pain in the world? That's enormously important. And of course, just to say one sentence, if reality was not Eros, if reality was not an intimate universe, if reality was, as Yuval suggests, completely empty, meaninglessness, there'd be no reason to be outraged by suffering and pain, because why would reality be any different? Does everyone get that? That's the paradox. The paradox is, if basically my answer to the question of where is, we live in a meaningless void, well, in a meaningless void, why shouldn't, on the border of what's today Pakistan and India, 3 million people be killed? And why shouldn't, right, children have their heads bashed into walls by fanatic, right, human beings driven to the edge of their frenzies? Why shouldn't that happen? And of course that happens, right? What happens? Human beings get caught, sometimes bad stories, right? They reduce to their basest instincts, right? Just like chimps do, or on a bad day, and babies' heads are smashed open. Why is that a problem? Well, it is a problem. We're actually outraged by it. It's a violation of everything we, in our deepest interior, hold dear. Why? Why? Because we hold this deep understanding that reality is meaningful, and fairness, right, is a quality of reality, and justice, right, needs to emerge, right, and goodness, truth, and beauty are actually the nature of reality, and we live in an intimate universe, and evil is a violation of intimacy. Right? Wow. So I just want to hold with you for a second, just the point I've been trying to make, which I'm slowly weaving our way to, which is that this notion that reality is filled with first principles and first values, that reality is not empty, that notion is actually a universal notion. And that actually, if we don't approach the world through that understanding, we actually can't even begin to create a universal grammar of value. And if we can't create a universal grammar of value, then we can't have global coordination in response to the global challenges of existential risk. So it's a big deal. We'll come to that more next week. So I want to just share with you for a second. This is a book written by Xi's brother-in-law. Xi is the head of China, Mr. China head, Xi, our beloved Xi, right? Who is one of the smartest and one of the greatest violators of human rights in the world today. And yet, the way to approach him, and we haven't gotten there yet, because that conversation hasn't happened, but the way to approach him is to invite him into a universal grammar of value which holds him accountable. And that has to be through his own sources. So his brother-in-law, right, Baoshan Ma, right, writes a book, right? One of many that he's written, called Cosmology and Logic and the Tao of Changes, which I'm reading now. But Zach and I are reading it. So just listen to this for a second, okay? This is going to just blow your mind. This is going to just completely blow your mind. And, you know, God willing, we're going to be reissuing. You have it there? Okay, great. Krista, just show us the book if you can. There's a book, First Principles and First Values, which we've just concluded, which is actually, you know, kind of this ultimate response to Harari. So what I'm about to read you, right, is going to be in the next edition. Thank you, Krista. You're awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And we're also impressed because we see your little marks in it. We see that you're reading. So we're like, wow, nicely done. Okay. So what I'm about to read you, it is about the answer to the question of where, right? And it's going to be in the next edition, right? Which we're working on now, which is going to just have a few more pieces. And he's talking about Taoism. And I'm going to read something which is going to blow your mind. Who's ready to have their mind blown? This is like mind blowing. Okay, this is like insanely crazy mind blowing. Okay, ready? All right. When you read this, you'll think, huh, that is exactly what we're saying in First Principles and First Values. Meaning he's not arguing Yuval's position, right? Reality's empty and meaningless. And yet the bridge hasn't yet been drawn to his brother-in-law. And that's how to draw that bridge is a very important question. I want to bracket it for now, but I want you just for a second, just to hear his answer to the question of where, Taoism's answer to the question of where, at least based on a set of text, you know, interpreted by the leader of China's brother-in-law, who's a major Taoist scholar. Ready to go? He said, this is written by an essayist who's writing. He's the translator, and he's kind of summarizing some of what Ma says in the book. So he writes, Ma's insistence on the continuity of mind in events. Right? So does everyone, what does he mean? What does he mean, the continuity of mind in events? Like, oh my God, we just lost it. Let's turn this off. What he means by the continuity of mind in events is exactly what we call, right, the continuity of value in the cosmos. Now, there's my mind, stay close, my mind is not separate from the cosmos. My mind participates in the cosmos. My mind participates in the field of cosmos. So my mind, right, is in continuous participation with reality and events in reality. So it's not that I'm over there, right? The old fundamentalist creation story. Creation's happening by a God who's out of cosmos, who's making shit up, and is creating me in order for me to be obedient to him or her, right? For some odd reason that we can't quite figure out. And God's in need of deep therapy, and so are we all, because we live in an irrational, slightly sadistic and sinister cosmos. No, actually, we are coextensive with cosmos. We are participatory in cosmos, right? It's a participatory universe. That's exactly what Ma is, the way Ma's reading Taoism, right? Ma insists on the continuity of mind and events. And this is the continuity of heaven and human beings. And I could read you the Chinese, but I'm sure I would butcher the pronunciation so insanely that I won't do it. But just listen to his next sentence. Human intentions could be cosmological. Just listen to this. This is unbelievable. Human intentions could be cosmological once they understand the continuity of mind and events. And that's right. Get this again. Human intentions, could be cosmological. What does that mean? What does it mean human intentions could be cosmological? Right? Once they understand the continuity of the mind and events, which is counter to the common Western belief that humans could be the master or conqueror of nature. I just want to get this, okay? Okay, it's insane, right? It's beautiful, right? And we're going to be reissuing First Principles and First Values book and incorporating some of Russian literature and some of China. It's unbelievably important. What he's saying is the exact same thing that the Solomon wisdom says. Taoism is saying that actually, if I set my intention participates, changes, and shapes cosmos. Wow. We call that in the Solomon wisdom, that's called l'shem yichud. L'shem yichud. For the sake of every action I do, I have an intention. My intention is l'shem yichud, for the sake of the yichud, of the union, of the erotic union, kutchabrichu ushechinte, the two unique qualities, right, of masculine and feminine that exist in cosmos, which doesn't mean masculine and feminine in a gendered sense. It's what we call, what Luria and the Solomon wisdom tradition calls lines and circles, which begin from the first nanoseconds after the Big Bang. So human beings participate in the field of cosmos. And the human intention could be cosmological. We can engage, we participate in cosmos. Now, does Taoism have an idea we can actually change, right? So I think that idea is implicit in Taoism. I'm not going to have a Taoist scholarly conversation now, but for now, human intentions could be cosmological. Once human intentions understand the continuity of minds and events, then I'm participatory in the field, which is counter to the common Western belief that human beings are just the master or the conqueror of nature. Now, listen to this again. Next sentence. Everyone tracking this? It's unbelievable, right? The Chinese ancient wisdom of the continuity of humans and cosmos is a perspective describing the real existence of humans in the cosmos. So Yuval, get over, brother. Get over your kind of knee-jerk rebellion, right, against the Israeli religious establishment. It is a little bit of a mess, I understand, but I got you. I lived there for 20 years. Right, I was in that system. I understand that you have a legitimate and important critique, which I spent 2 decades expressing. We share that critique. Yes, you and I both understand, Yuval, that Voltaire, right, bringing modernity into existence, cried out, "Remember the cruelties." Yes, we understand the overreaches, right, and the tragedies wrought by religion, but those are equally wrought by science. And don't have your conclusion be a kind of deep embodiment, but unimaginably superficial, dogmatic, fundamentalist thinking about meaning in the world, right? Which is but an echo and a parrot, right, of classical postmodernism meeting Buddhism in a particular way. And that meeting between postmodernism and Buddhism happens all the time. It's a common meeting, right? So that's a common, you're reflecting kind of a common position, which is superficial in an unimaginable way. And the opposite of the holy is not the profane. The opposite of the holy is the superficial. So, brother, we can do better than this, right? And this is not some old religious position you need to rebel against, this notion that reality is a field of value in which we participate. This is the basic structural understanding of reality held by the Solomon wisdom at its best, held by Taoism at its best. Right? We can do better, brother. Okay, so let me keep reading. Right? So in this perspective of the continuity of mind and events, right, this would be very helpful in assisting, right, writes Ma, the Western understanding of traditional Chinese wisdom. That is, human spiritual participation illuminates the cosmos. Hello, right? Human spiritual interpretation. This is Ma, the brother-in-law of Xi's reading of Taoism. Human spiritual participation illuminates the cosmos, and it's only through the minute changes of human intentions that the benevolent and creative nature of the cosmos can reveal itself to human beings. I'm going to say this again. I'm going to just check this out, right? That is, human spiritual participation illuminates the cosmos, and it's only through minute changes of human intentions that the benevolent and creative nature of the cosmos can reveal itself to human beings. Accordingly, this is what Ma is saying, accordingly, human beings celebrate being the co-participants flourishing in the living spiritual and mystical cosmos. I've been saying this in one way or the other, reflecting the Solomon tradition for the last 25 years. I had no idea, right, that Xi's brother-in-law, Ma, was reading Taoism in the same way, and he's a very, very good reader of Taoism. You begin to see what we're calling a universal grammar of value. So Yuval, when you assert in your book, right, deceptively hijacking, right, the authority of science, that the human world is empty and meaningless, right, devoid, right, of any fullness, you're actually going against the most subtle and speculative minds in every generation in history, and you're saying it as if it's kind of obvious. Wow, what a dogmatic, and I apologize, my brother, but arrogant claim, right? So if you've worked this through, let me know, but you haven't. You're parroting. You're parroting. Don't parrot, man. Right? You're smart. You're deep. You're beautiful. Give us your best. Give us your deepest thinking, right? As a layman, I understand you're not a philosopher. That's okay. Now, Yuval, we're going to go back, brother. I'm going to go to the next paragraph. Okay, everyone up for the next paragraph? Here's the next paragraph. Okay, I'm reading Cosmology and Logic in the Tao of Changes, Bao Shan Ma. I completely apologize for any butchered pronunciations. Here's the next paragraph. Okay, you ready? Everybody ready for this? Is this shockingly beautiful? Does everyone get why this is so important? This is the answer to the question of where. As for the application of this revival of ancient Chinese wisdom in modern ordinary lives, so, right, Ma's asking, why does this matter? He says the Chinese social pattern should follow the Tao of heaven, and the structure of society comes after following the eternal patterns of the cosmos. The structure of society comes after following the eternal patterns of the cosmos. Wow. Right? So he's understanding that politics and metaphysics need to be linked, but of course, that position requires itself another deeper structure, which is he could fall into here very easily the Aquinas trap, which is politics has to follow the eternal structure of cosmos, which is unchanging, objective, which doesn't evolve, which actually violates the structure of cosmos, which is evolving. So, and it's the danger here is to adopt Taoism, right, as a kind of religious fig leaf for a particular Chinese political position, which claims the authority of eternity and denies that actually, right, what eternity is saying is that there's a Tao, that there's a ground of value, but it could actually try and freeze value at a particular moment in time and not allow it to follow its own inherent eros, which is to evolve. So when I wrote together with Zach, when David J. Temple, together with our friend Ken Wilber, when we wrote, and I remember when the sentence occurred to me, when, in First Principles and First Values, where we write, the eternal value is the evolving Tao, I was responding to my readings of Taoism. All right, so Ma has to be careful here not to fall into a position which says that the 10,000 things in Taoism, you have the Tao, out of which emerges the 10,000 things, that the 10,000 things, which is the structure of society, should not be subordinate to a dogmatic interpretation of the eternal Tao, which ignores and rejects evolution. So the eternal Tao is the evolving Tao, and the relationship between eternity and evolution is critical. And we're going to talk about that separately, because the assumption is that if the Tao is eternal, it can't be evolving. Is everyone with me? Who's in for just one more deeper? Okay, here we go. The reason that Yuval, but not Yuval is again echoing. I don't want to use the word Yuval, I apologize, parroting. I don't want to do that in a kind of condescending or negative way, right? But Daryl, you're doing good. Pretty much so is good. Okay. But the reason Yuval is echoing the classical postmodern position, and the reason the postmodern position that Yuval echoes, right, actually says, as Yuval does, that it's all made up, right, that there is no real value, is because they're rebelling against positions in all the religions which said that value is eternal and unchanging. That's what Aquinas said. Value is eternal and unchanging. That's not true. Value is eternal, but eternal means not everlasting and unchanging. Eternal doesn't mean everlasting time, right? What eternity means is that which is beneath time and space, right? It's the inherent structure of value, which is beneath time and space. So Angus, eternal doesn't mean everlasting time. You get it, brother? Eternal means that which is, that's correct, right? Eternal means the shunyata, the deep ground, or the Tao, or the field of value, which incepts cosmos. Which is why when cosmos appears, it has an entire field of value already in place, which expresses itself as mathematical value. It expresses itself as subatomic value. It expresses itself as musical value, and as actually the nascent forms of moral value. And we'll talk about that. But actually, when separate parts come together to form a larger whole, to create new intimacies, while respecting the integrity of the individual parts, which is exactly how subatomic particles come together to form an atom, you actually have, right, a field of value in place. And value means there's a particular quality which cosmos desires, which is an ought of cosmos, which is a good result, which is a result of cosmos that affirms life, that affirms value. And that's why protons and neutrons come together with electrons. Those are unique values. They come together, they form a unique whole, which is a new unique value, which then generates ever more wholeness, ever more value. But that's in the structure of cosmos itself. But that structure of cosmos, that eternal structure, right, Angus, is not eternal as in unchanging, right? Reality doesn't stop at hydrogen. If cosmos was an eternal cosmos that was unchanging, there'd be no manifestation. There'd be no, as Aristotle would say, no sublunar sphere. There'd be no world of manifestation, meaning, said simply, Angus, you and I wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be changing. We wouldn't be growing. We wouldn't be transforming. We wouldn't be challenged, right? The reality is that infinity desired finitude, right? The infinite eternal, right, actually desired to manifest finitude. So eternity doesn't mean, oh, I'm eternal only if I'm unchanging, right? Divinity didn't stop being eternal because divinity manifested the world. The world's a change. The world's something new. No, eternity means the ground of value, the ground of infinite intimacy. It's why I like to, when I turn to God, and again, the God you don't believe in doesn't exist. Not that God. The God that Yuval rejects, I reject. We both reject, right? The God that tells people what kind of fashion to wear, right? Or the God that says only this people are chosen, those people should be killed. Yuval, we both don't believe in the same God. But the God who is the infinite intimate, God is the infinite intimate, the infinity desiring intimacy, infinity desiring more value, right? That God, right? That God that kind of manifests cosmos, this ground of value, this eternal God is not eternal in the sense of being everlasting and unchanging. It's the ground underneath space-time. I'm going to say it again. Eternity is not everlasting time. Eternity is beneath space-time. But it's ever, always, already present. And it infuses all space-time and it's beneath space-time. That's eternity. So eternity evolves. How do you know? Well, here we are. Right, here we are. Right, so eternity discloses itself as a field of evolution. Does everyone get that? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So, let's hold for a second. Hold. So let's go back to Ma. So let's read Ma again, okay? As for the application, right, of this revival of ancient Chinese wisdom, which is that there's a Tao, that there's actually, and my reading of the Tao, what I call the Tao in First Principles and First Values, myself, Zach Ken, right, David J. Temple, we call the Tao the field of value, right? It's a very precise read. So he says Chinese social patterns, right, today should follow the Tao in the structure of society, right? The structure of society should follow the Tao, right? Let me read that. Delete that. Let me read this more clearly, okay? Yeah. Right. Modern ordinary lives in China, the Chinese social pattern should follow the Tao of heaven, and the structure of society comes after following the eternal patterns of cosmos. So I just bracketed and said, okay, those eternal patterns of cosmos, my friend Ma, are eternal and evolving. And you can't, my friend Ma, and your brother-in-law Shi, you can't freeze frame eternity at a particular historical time and claim, oh, okay, we're done. End of story. And then use that as a cover for brutal totalitarianism that violates human rights and that violates human dignity and that violates love. It's got to beware. Just like Christendom can make that move, Taoism can make that move. Just like Shiite Islam or degraded versions of Sunni Islam, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, right, in Yemen, can make that move, right? So Taoism can. So I just want to be clear. Taoism can make that move as well, okay? Having said that, the realization, the move by China and by Xi's brother-in-law to try and ground China in the field of value is enormously important, because once we're in the field of value, now we're in a conversation. Now let's talk about eternity that's evolving Tao. Now let's look at Taoist texts. Now we can begin to articulate together a grammar of value. Now, stay close, okay? He says the current westernization of Chinese society seems to have changed the societal structure away from the non-individuated person. Let me read that again. However, the current westernization of Chinese society seems to have changed the societal structure away from the non-individuated person. Right? What he's saying is, oh, the Tao is about the field, and it stands against individuation, stands against the individual. Now, that's a particular reading of the Tao, and there's some truth in some dimensions of that reading, but of course, there's other texts that go the other way. So what he's trying to do is adopt the Tao as support for the non-individuated person. And he says, it's not appropriate culturally that the Chinese non-individuated person should be strengthened. Meaning it's not appropriate to strengthen the unique individual. He's standing against uniqueness. He's standing against the dignity of the individual in a particular way. Instead, he says, Chinese society should strengthen the traditional value system, which can be traced back to its ancient cosmological roots as the Tao of heaven. Okay, so great. So here we've got a field of value. Okay, right? Exactly the opposite, Yuval, of what you're saying. And we can critique this vision of eternity because eternity doesn't mean unchanging. And Yuval, whenever you read eternity, you actually caricature eternity. Eternity means unchanging, and you contrast it with evolution. Oh, that's a mistake. Actually, the eternal Tao is the evolving Tao. Actually, we can have eternity and evolution that live together. Actually, eternity means the ground of value. And so what we need to do is, my friend, we need to go back and liberate the sparks from the broken vessels. Does that make sense? Religion created vessels for value. Pre-modernity was filled with vessels for value called religions. All those vessels competed with each other. They each thought they had exclusive claim to truth. Along came the new revelations of the sciences and shattered the vessels. That's what happened in the Renaissance and post-Renaissance. The vessels shattered. The vessels broke. Religion collapsed. The center of society collapsed. The old structures collapsed. Broken vessels, they collapsed legitimately. And they collapsed just like in the great cosmological vision of the Solomon wisdom, in which the vessels shatter. They collapsed because of the intensity of light, meaning new scientific knowledge, new understandings of human rights, new understandings of third-person perspective, right? Lena spoke about this in a One Mountain, right, about art a couple of months back, about some of these issues. It's a big deal. So the light shatters the vessels, but then you have these broken vessels in the cosmological image of the Solomon wisdom, and in each one of the broken vessels, there's a spark of light. So each one of the great traditions is a broken vessel, and the spark of light is the realization of the inherent value structure of cosmos. Those sparks of light need to be liberated. what the master, what the prophetic voice has to do is, and we need to be that prophetic voice together. We need to be David J. Temple together. We need to liberate the sparks from the broken vessels. Or to say it in a different version of the vernacular, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Throw out the dirty bathwater, throw out, but don't throw out the baby, which is the field of value itself. And in order to do that, we need to realize that the eternal Tao is the evolving Tao. Okay? Now, stay with me for a second, okay? Okay, with me? Can everyone up for one more second? Okay, I want to finish this last piece. Okay, we're going to get to reading the code. We haven't done that yet. Okay, but this is fantastic. So he says the contribution, right? Ma's contribution, right? The essayist who's published in Ma's book. So it's obviously been approved by Ma, right? And he's the translator of this essayist I'm reading. And it's in the book. I'm reading from the book, right? He says, Ma's contribution is, is returning China to the cosmology of the Tao of changes. Right, which is the return to the original ontological thinking of Chinese philosophy. Wow. Taking Qi as an example, Ma's understanding of Qi, vital force, which I would call Eros, is more relevant to pre-heaven existence, which is pure and pristine. When Qi manifests within normal phenomena, when Eros enters into the world, and diverse phenomena and events come into being, then what emerges are, listen to this, Ma's 5 ontogenerative beings. Ma describes a field of ontogenerative beings. Everyone get that word? Ontogenerative beings. What is ontogenerative? Value. Ontogenerative beings are first principles and first values. Wow. Right? I want to thank a colleague of Zach's and mine. I actually haven't met him directly. I think he's tracked us over the years, who pointed us to this book. Right? Wow. It's like, wow. Okay. So first principles and first values are ontogenerative beings. And Ma's 5 ontogenerative beings become different forms within the evolution of Qi. So all of a sudden, we see that actually Ma, who seemed to be talking before about unchanging eternal, is actually beginning to talk about the evolution of Qi. So he's beginning to move towards this notion that we wrote in the First Principles and First Values book, that the eternal Tao is the evolving Tao. But he would say the eternal Qi is the evolving Qi. The eternal Eros is the evolving Eros. Ma's 5 ontogenerative beings become different forms within the evolution of Qi, or Eros, which is alive with cosmological consciousness, within which human beings participate. Oh my fucking God. Right? This is the Eros of the divine in somewhat different form. But it's not describing an empty universe. Right? This is the, now listen to the sense, right? There's this evolving Qi, it's the evolution of Qi, which is alive with cosmological consciousness, within which humans can participate and complete as part of the cosmological human continuum. The cosmological human continuum. Like, wow. Right? Like, wow. Right? Like, wow. We get this, everybody? It's like, like, wow, right? So there's this notion in which, on the one hand, the present moment is eternity, which is absolutely true. That's absolutely right. There's an experience in the present moment of full eternity, and anyone who's actually done real practice has experienced that. There's actually an eternity that resides in the moment. And it's called in the Tree of Life in the Solemn Wisdom, it's called Netzach. Remember the song, anyone, If I Could Put Time in a Bottle? Right? There's an eternity that resides in the moment. right? It's beyond time and beyond space. It's eternal. There is an eternity like that. That is the ground. That's the Tao, which is beneath the space-time continuum. That's exactly right. And then that eternity discloses itself paradoxically in evolution. Now, I want you to follow with me really carefully, okay? Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears, okay? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. If I would not say that that evolution flows from eternity, I would be a complete dualist. I'd be saying that there's a world of divine sacred or eternity, and then there's a world without divine sacred eternity, meaning a world that's actually empty of divine sacred eternity, which is exactly what Harari's saying. The world's empty. So I want to get this. It's so deep. Right? It's this realization that there's, on the one hand, this ground of value, this eternal field of value. And we know this eternal field of value because it lives in us. Because I can't look at it now. Bracket for a second. In 2, 3, 4 weeks from now, at some point, we're going to do an entire 1 or 2 mountains on value is real. We're going to get to that. We're about to publish an essay, a 50, 60,000 word essay, David J. Temple on value is real. Okay, so we're going to get to that. So let me bracket that for a second. But just for right now, we just did attachment theory earlier in our conversation. We said, can you look in a baby's eye? Can you look in a 3-year-old's eye and say, I love you. I love you. I love you. I'm holding you. You're welcome. But that welcome is just a story, just so you know. Right? And it's not real. It's not really real. Why are you telling me that, mother? Why are you telling me that? It destroys the child because the child participates. That's exactly what Ma, citing Buddhism, is saying. But it's also the fundamental realization of the subtle and speculative wisdom of the solemn wisdom, which says every human being is chelek, and Talia, maybe you'll write this in the chat box, chelek Eloha mamash, an ontogenetic participatory expression of eternal value. Chelek Eloha mimal mamash. I'm literally, ontologically, I participate in the field. Now, what Ma does is Ma says, oh, and the way I'm reading this field is all about the field and not about the individual. And that to participate in the field, I've got to give up my individuality, or at least large parts of it, which is very close to classical Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism and to a lot of Vajrayana. Right? That's a huge mistake. Right? The mistake, right, of the Eastern traditions, Taoism included, was that it actually viewed separation as being the structure of reality that we need to move against. Okay, delete that sentence. I'm going to say it better. Delete sentence deleted. Elena, sentence deleted. Everybody, delete that sentence. Let me say it better. The mistake of the Eastern traditions and of certain Western Hasidic and mystical Christian traditions as well is that they got the reality of the field of value, and they thought that you need to stand against separation, which they were right about. You got to stand against separation. So therefore, they would say things like Ma says in this book, which is the goal is the non-individuated person. The goal is the anti-individual, because your individuality is your separation. It separates you from the field. It's not actually right. It's not right empirically. It's not right scientifically. In terms of evolutionary science, it's also not right in terms of interior science. And what I'm trying to do is what we're trying to do, what David J. Temple's trying to do, what we're trying to do together is to crack open the field and to evolve the source code of consciousness and culture. So we're going to make that move right now. And just parentheses, here's the parentheses. Let me just answer the question, okay? You ready? Let me just answer the question. How is it possible that the evolution of consciousness and culture is taking place here, right? In one mountain, many paths. Shouldn't this be happening in a graduate seminar in Oxford? Right? Well, let me just tell you something. Most graduate seminars in Oxford and in Harvard, right? We've actually seen what the Ivy League produced in terms of, right, Israel in the last year, right? Utter tragedy. utter tragedy in the Middle East. And as I've said many times, I'm very, very close to some incredibly beautiful Gazan doctors, right? Obviously, right? Obviously, every drop of blood is precious, but the insanity of the Western university, right? Taking kind of like literally refusing to condemn even what happened on October 7th is about where the Western university is, right? The thinking in graduate seminars in Oxford and Harvard, right? And at, Yale and the Sorbonne is so bad, is so dogmatic, is so frozen that it's kind of unimaginable, which is why we have to step out and actually create, right, a new force of goodness and integrity. And so I'm going to say something, I apologize that this is one of those insincere apologies, right? But I just want to say it. We are at the leading edge, right? Doesn't mean we get it always right, but we're thinking day and night. And this is what we're trying to share, right? In One Mountain, Many Paths is not casual, it's not populist. It's what's the next evolution of the source code. So in the next evolution of the source code, we understand that we need to stand against separation, that Ma is correct in his reading of Taoism. We need to stand against separation. But that doesn't mean that we get to this place of what he calls the non-individuated being. That's not correct. That's a wrong conclusion. What we actually get to is higher individuation beyond ego, right? In other words, we stand against separateness that says I'm merely a separate self. We actually realize that I'm part of the Tao, I'm part of the field. We'll call that true self. True self is the Tao, the field, or the field of value. And then I realize that I am what? That I am unique self. I'm an irreducibly unique expression of the ontogenetic beingness, right, that lives in me, uniquely in me, as me, and through me, that never was, is, or will be other than through me ever in history. And my uniqueness doesn't separate me from the field. It doesn't make me separate and in that sense selfish and in that sense degraded. My uniqueness is the currency of connection. Now, stay close, friends. Ma is correct in the way he portrays Western thought, right? He's counterposing, and just on what I just read you, he's counterposing Taoism as standing for communion and non-individuated being as a value. So he makes communion the value, but he ignores the value of uniqueness because he can't see the value of uniqueness because he actually mistakes uniqueness for separateness. Did everyone get that sentence? Was that too much? Did everyone get that sentence? In other words, he's affirming the value of communion, which is the non-individuated being in the Tao. He rejects the Western position correctly because he understands the Western position and he is right as affirming separateness, which is the Western mistake. It's not about separateness. It's about uniqueness. Now just notice this. It's so insanely gorgeous when you get it. This is the evolution of the source code itself. This is Yuval, what we need to be doing together. In other words, the East, Ma, makes a mistake and he says, no, the value is communion, the field, and therefore we need non-individuated being. So he rejects individuation because he says that individuation is separateness. His mistake is, no. Individuation doesn't need to be separateness. It can be uniqueness. I'm part of the field, but I'm a unique expression of the field. That's the next evolution of consciousness. That's the next evolution of love. And it's my unique self is not just mechanical functional. It's the unique expression of the ontogenetic being, which is the Eros of Cosmos, the Chi of Cosmos, living uniquely in me, as me, and through me. That's one. The West makes a mistake because the West says, oh, we've got these two values, communion and autonomy, individuation. So the West ignores communion. It views communion as being somehow dominating, right? Communion means my value comes from the whole, which meant in the pre-modern world, the state, the religion, right? The king, etc. So Western Renaissance said, no. Forget about this communion thing. I exist. I have irreducible dignity in and of myself. And I'm going to affirm that value in the Tao, right? The West said, it's all about autonomy, which is my separate self. It's not about the field. But the West made the same mistake. Right? You get this? That Ma made. The West said it's all about individuation. And the West said individuation means separate self, separateness. No! Individuation means what? unique self. As I move beyond my separate self, I recognize that I'm in the Tao, and then I'm a unique discretion of the ontogenetic field of being called the Tao, right? And ontogenetic means first principle and first value. Ontogenetic being in Ma's reading of Taoism is first principle and first value. Now, did you get what we just did together, my friends? Do you get what we did? Just so beautiful. It's so exciting. We just brought together the two fields of value in the world. And we realize there's eternal and evolving value, number one. We realize that the Western Renaissance, right, which birthed science and birthed the individual, got something enormously right. It evolved our understanding of the individual in the Tao. It moves us beyond a non-individuated being to the possibility of individuation, but not against the Tao, but as an expression of the Tao. And it actually evolved Taoism's understanding and allowed Taoism to embrace the actual empirical reality of uniqueness. Uniqueness is what Ma would call an ontogenetic being. And Ma, if you're listening, brother, right, do you understand? Right? In other words, your ontogenetic being, right, your 5 ontogenetic beings have to include uniqueness if you're actually taking the chi of reality seriously, because reality is the emergence of ever greater and deeper levels of uniqueness, which is why Herbert Spencer in his book, First Principles, in chapter 15, talks about differentiation and integration. I mean, reality differentiates, it becomes unique. Then uniqueness becomes the currency of new union, the currency of connection. Does you follow? Ma, are you with me, my friend? Okay, heart to heart, right? So in other words, if you take ontogenetic being seriously, you have to include uniqueness. If you include uniqueness, then you have a structure to actually evolve Chinese society from within. On the one hand, you hold the value of the field, right, which is the field of the Tao, and you can hold that traditional Taoist value in strong and beautiful sense. And yet, as you yourself say, these ontogenetic beings evolve, the chi evolves, and you can embrace uniqueness, not separateness. You need to correctly turn to the West, Ma, and say, you got lost in separateness. But actually embrace uniqueness. And as you embrace uniqueness, then the West has to embrace the field. And once we do that, this entire ridiculous, absurd Chinese American, right, juggernaut race, which at this moment has the potential to destroy the world, right? Since the AI race now is taking place primarily between China and the United States, right, between Silicon Valley and certain, regions in China, right? And the question is, who's going to get AGI, artificial intelligence, first, and then impose a value lock-in on the world? That is actually what's happening literally right now. I'm not making this up. This is what's happening literally right now. And by the way, McAllister, right? I think that's his name, right? In the beginning of his book describes this fairly well, but there's also a number of key papers that have come out of Silicon Valley in the last 5 weeks, the last 2 months, right? That we talked about at our recent conclave. I'll put them in the links, right? That actually describe this unimaginably well as well, right? That actually this race, there's actually an arms race, right, going on right now, which is more damaging than any arms race we've ever had. And it's for artificial general intelligence. Whoever gets artificial general intelligence becomes the most powerful force in the world. They actually, not through an army, it means that the entire digital world is essentially owned. There's economic, military, digital propaganda superiority of exponential kind. And the story of the world's rewritten. That's actually where we're heading. And what we spend today doing, and Yuval, my friend, this is what we need to be doing. When you just declare a meaningless world, right, you are not helping the story, right? You can't help the story because you're, I'm sure, a crazy beautiful, and I'm sure a crazy smart guy, right? Let's actually get involved in a real conversation. And I want to invite everyone to read a book called Unique Self, okay? Your Unique Self, which talks about this. Yuval, I know you like scholarly publications. So I'm going to invite you and everyone else to read something called the Journal of Integral Theory and Practice, volume 6:1, 6:1, which is a scholarly journal where we wrote some 5-6 articles on some of these distinctions. Okay, they're really important. We're going to be starting a course in, I think, November, We're going to be talking about some of these distinctions out of the Unique Self Institute. But this is a big deal. This is a big deal. So what have we done? Okay, we've answered the question of where. What I've tried to show is that the question of where, which is two things. It's where are we right now in the plot line of the world story? Existential risk, metacrisis. I agree completely with Yuval on that. But where the deeper question is how we respond to that metacrisis is you can only begin that conversation. We're not completing it. I'm going to stop here. We can only begin that conversation by first establishing the deeper where, the ontological question of where am I? What's the nature of the universe story? Okay. And we're inviting Yuval to move beyond the blind echo of postmodern reductionism, which flies against the best subtle and speculative wisdom, the depth structures, not the surface structures, not the bad stories, not the fictitious stories, but the depth structures and of all the lineages, which disagree with each other on major issues, but there's a shared realization of a Tao, right, of a field of value. And we saw both in the Solomon wisdom and the beginning today in Taoism, this notion of an evolving chi, an evolving field of value, and evolving Eros. Okay. Let's summarize today with our code. Let's just read the code as the summation. We're going to turn to Krista. Let me just do a check-in. I know it's 2:32. Just who followed here? Who was able to kind of track here? I'm just putting my glasses on. Okay. Who was able to follow here? Okay. How did we do? We did a lot. And I was trusting everyone in a big way. So thank you. I was completely trusting your kind of staying and your depth and your insane goodness and your wonder and your beauty. So thank you. Like insane. Thank you. Like, thank you. This changes everything, right? We're our swords are out, my friends. Our swords are out. We have to be ontological warriors, ontological activists for the sake of the whole. And you think, oh my God, this is so freaking irrelevant. It's not. It's only when we can do the deep work to change the very source code of the story in a way that Ma can come together, right? Can come together, right? Ma and I can come together. Solomon wisdom and Taoism can come together. Yuval can lend his appropriate critiques of fictive stories, which we'll get to in a different week, which are appropriate. His critiques of the surface structures of the old religions are appropriate, but we've known those for 400 years, my friend. Right? You and I both recognize the metacrisis. We can't respond to the metacrisis without a new story of value. It can't be done. And why that's true, we'll talk about next week. Give us a code. We got a code? Take us inside to the code and wrap us. Krista, thank you.
Thank you. So this week's evolutionary love code. Value is real. Value can be distorted. Clarification of value is the great purpose, passion, and joy of life. Story is real. Story can be distorted. Clarification of story is the great purpose, passion, and joy of life. All stories are stories of value. Only a new story of value will protect the trillions of unborn lives and loves that will otherwise be lost to existential risk. So it really matters. And just to be clear, the claim that there is no value, that value is not real, that all stories of value are fictions, is itself probably the most dogmatic possible story of value in the history of the world.